right, welcome to our round one tipping show on the outer. I've got Gus here, and I've also got Lemons. Welcome, Lemons, to the program in the on-air capacity.
Thank you for having me on, bringing my expertise in the footy tipping the masses.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So we're going to tip the round one games now. If you haven't caught up on our episode that we recorded the other day for our round one,
we're all wearing the same clothes.
Then you should, yeah, that's fine. Then you should check that out. It's on YouTube and Spotify and iTunes and all the rest of it. So have a look and let's get straight into the tipping. First game at Melbourne v the Bulldogs. How can you sort of have a more exciting game to open the season? I'm glad they've gone back to this. This was a tradition they used to do back a decade or so ago, is have the first game as the grand final rematch. And I think it's a great move. And I'm going to tip the Ds. It's back at the MCG. Last time we saw them play, they won by about 13 goals. So I'm going to tip the Ds. But it'll be interesting to see if the Dogs really come out fired up and exact revenge, because I know that they'll be pretty hurt by what happened in the grand final.
Are we just going to explain what is going to happen to the person who loses the tipping this season, Tom? As we intimated that we were going to in Monday's show all those days ago. Okay, so the idea is that this season, rather than just having a boring old tipping competition where we don't really have a payoff at the end, we have started a TikTok channel for On the Outer. Lemons has done that, haven't you, Lemons? So thank you for that. And the plan is that whoever finishes third in this tipping for this season is going to have to do one of the TikTok dances that is out there and put it up for all to see. So there is a fair bit of embarrassment in line for the loser. You don't get anything if you win. You just don't have to be embarrassed, basically. So that's the plan at this stage. Hopefully everyone can hold us to that, unless I lose, in which case I'll be trying to make everyone forget that was agreed to. All right, yep. So Melbourne Western Bulldogs. I'm going to tip the Dogs because I think that they will come out roaring. We saw the Demons just being a little bit slack against Carlton in the preseason. I think that could continue in the first couple of weeks of the normal season, the regular home and away season. So I'm tipping the Dogs just because I think that they could potentially kind of come out more motivated than the Demons in round one and knock them off in this one.
Right, well, that makes my decision quite tricky because I was just going to copy the two of you to see which one you went with. Now I feel like I'm choosing between my mum and my dad. I don't know which one. But
very beardy mum and dad.
I think I'm going to go with the Melbourne Demons. I mean, they're the reigning premiers. Like you said, Tom, the last time they played, they won by 1 million points. So long as they play up to a similar standard, I reckon the Ds will have it covered pretty easily.
All right, Thursday night game, what has been the traditional season opener over the last few years in fairly unimpressive, fairly unimpressive contests, it has to be said. But Richmond versus Carlton, that's also going to be at the G. More interesting, I think, this year in that these clubs would probably, I think, perceive themselves having similar kind of plans for the season internally. At least they would both certainly be looking to play finals. I think they would both be thinking that they are a chance to steal a top 4 spot as well, potentially even. So a little bit tougher. I'm going to tip Richmond in this one. I think that this is sort of the Richmond before they start breaking down, as they inevitably will when the crisis hits. But I think Richmond to beat Carlton and continue the pain for Carlton's first game of the season, as has been for what feels like a decade now, where they just lose every round one to Richmond. So Richmond for me.
I think this is a game where if either team wins this by more than, say, 5 goals, it's going to be a big story. Like if Richmond, beat Carlton by a really comfortable margin, people are going to really, flip one way on that. And by the same token, if Carlton come out and roll Richmond, it's going to be a big story as well. I think Carlton are going to win. I think that this ongoing drought of round one defeats, to me, that this is a bit of a circuit breaker, bringing in Voss. It feels like there's a bit of a change afoot at Carlton this year, both on field and off field, and I think this will be a symbolic victory for them to signify that change and that leaving the past behind. So I'm going to tip Carlton narrowly, but I think that they will be really, really up for this game, and I think that might be the extra couple of % they need to win it.
Kick off the crisis early. Clemens?
Well, yeah, I think Richmond's going to win. I know a couple of Carlton supporters, and they're very bullish on the Blues' chances this season. And I think the Richmond are going to come out and break some hearts in round one and really have the Carlton supporters doubting themselves and whether Michael Voss is actually a good coach or not.
Just where we like them.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think as much as I don't really enjoy seeing the Tigers win either, I think Tigers in round one over the Blues.
All right, we'll go to Friday night and St Kilda v Collingwood. This is probably two teams that are not overly backed this year in terms of their overall fortunes will be. So one of them is going to get off to a good start, at least anyway. I think St Kilda will be better than Collingwood this year, and I think that they'll probably win this game. There's a few question marks over the Saints in terms of like what personnel they're going to have out there, whether Zach Jones is going to be back at the club, and if he is, whether he'll be, conditioned enough to play. I think that's probably unlikely. Paddy Ryder, unlikely to play round one. So some pretty important players won't be there, but I think that their just overall class is a bit higher than what we have at Collingwood, and they should win this game, particularly at Marvel Stadium. I think you can see them winning by a couple of goals.
Yeah, I agree. I think St Kilda too good for Collingwood. They're in a different tier of the competition, or at least they certainly should be. So, look, if St Kilda lost to Collingwood, it would be a disaster, and if Collingwood lost to St Kilda, I don't think it would be a disaster. So that's how I'm going to see it, and I'm going to tip the Saints.
Yep, I reckon this one was a pretty easy one. I also have the Saints by a pretty comfortable margin, I reckon. All right, on Saturday afternoon at 2:10, we've got the Geelong Cats playing the Essendon Bombers at the MCG. This is, as an Essendon supporter, for any of the listeners who aren't aware, I'm also now the second Bombers supporter on the podcast. So this one is a really easy one for me. In fact, every week I'll probably be picking the Bombers depending on how this season goes. But as an Essendon supporter who grew up in Geelong, I'm pretty excited to watch the Bombers beat the Cats and sort of put an end to this dynasty that's been slowly dying in Geelong for the last, feels like a decade or so.
Yeah, that's what I like to hear. I'm tipping the Bombers too. I think we can beat the Cats. I think Essendon should get Shield, Stringer, and potentially Aaron Francis back in. Harry Jones is going to miss out, but I think that's okay at this point. And the Cats, look, who knows what Geelong are going to look like this season. I think it's pretty hard to tell, but this is the sort of game that Essendon would be hoping to come out and win, because this is sort of the criticism of Essendon last season was that they couldn't beat the teams above them on the ladder, and this is where they can really begin their season off on a positive note and beat one of those teams. So, tipping the Bombers, I think it's going to happen.
Yeah, Bombers for me as well. I think Essendon and Geelong should be in this sort of the same ladder range this season, and I think Bombers just look a bit sharper and a little bit fresher at the moment. I think there's, as we said last week, there's a bit of buzz around them this year, and I think they are going to start the season off pretty well. And I think Geelong don't necessarily always do that. We saw them lose to Adelaide in round one last year, and they can be a little bit sluggish to kick the season off. So I think Essendon should win this one.
We got the Battle of the Bridge at 5 o'clock on Saturday, sort of evening. GWS versus Sydney. This is an interesting game, I think, with the Swans potentially transitioning a little bit with part of their midfield. JPK is going to come off half back, which I think should be pretty interesting to see. I'm going to pick the Giants, though. As I said on our Monday show, I sort of see them as having the inside track for that top 4 spot, potentially with Sydney. So this is going to be a good game, but they've just got so much talent, so much class, and I think that they're good enough to win this.
Yeah, of course, the big storyline in this game is Buddy needing 5 goals to get his thouso, so that'll be cool if he gets it. If he doesn't get it, then the Swans are playing a home game at the SCG the following week, so he should get it there. But I find this one probably one of the hardest, if not the hardest, to pick this week. I think both teams are going to be competing for potentially a top 4, certainly top 8 spot. I think that I've probably got Sydney winning this one. I'm just not 100% sure that the Giants will hit their straps early on. And I touched on the reasons for that earlier in the other episode we did the other day about Toby Green missing that first few weeks and then a few question marks over the fitness of Hogan. So I'm going to go with Sydney, but yeah, this is a ripper. I'm looking forward to it.
Yep, I'm also going to go the Sydney Swans. I found this one really tricky as well because you two are both so high on GWS, and I've been listening to a lot of you talking about GWS. But I think, for the reasons you just mentioned, I think Buddy kicks the 5 goals, probably more, and it is a highlight on a excellent career that he's had.
Mm. All right, well, we'll go to the Gabba. There's some good games in this first week. We've got Port Adelaide and Brisbane. This is another cracker. Port Adelaide are one of the big watches for me this season. I'm a little bit sceptical on them. I do think, though, they still have a very, very solid best 22. It's just a matter of getting those players out there and having them all playing good footy at the same time. Whereas Brisbane, very few question marks over their team. And this game being at the Gabba, I think that they will be too good and maybe put a bit of a warning sign to the competition with a 4 or 5 goal win over Port.
Brisbane are going to win the Gabatoir. Port Adelaide can't beat teams that are better than them, so what are we worried about? Brisbane comfortably.
Yep, that's an easy one for me as well. Brisbane at the Gabba. I feel like they're going to win a lot of games at the Gabba this year, so it'll be an easy one.
Mm-hmm.
Talking up how great the games were, Tom, we've come to a shuddering halt with that. We've got Hawthorn versus North Melbourne on Sunday early afternoon, the early Sunday game. Look, for me, I think this is North Melbourne should win this game. I think they're slightly ahead of Hawthorn, especially considering O'Meara, Tom Mitchell are both under injury clouds. Now they're expected to play, but they've come off sort of interrupted pre-seasons over the last few weeks. Giath as well is potentially going to play, but again is coming off a bit of an injury interrupted pre-season. Will Day won't play. Chad Wingard only played the last pre-season game and hasn't done a lot of pre-season running. So I'm not expecting much from Hawthorn generally this season, but I'm particularly expecting them to start slowly. So I think North Melbourne should be just good enough to beat them in a pretty turgid affair at the MCG on Sunday afternoon.
This is a tricky one because if this were at Marvel, I think I'd be tipping the Kangaroos. But at the G, they've just barely played there. I think when Robbie Tarrant came across to Richmond at the end of last year, he said he'd played 12 games at the MCG in his career, which is very, very bizarre. It's hard to even imagine that could happen. So I'm kind of leaning towards Hawthorn in this one. I think North will be a better team this year, but I think there's not that much between them, and I think the venue could get them over the line, especially if those guys do end up playing. I'm going to tip Hawthorn just.
Yeah, I guess this one's a tough one. I would have tipped both of them to lose if I had that as an option. But I think I'm going to go with the Hawks for a similar reason. Being at the G kind of makes it feel like they'll have an advantage, and both of them being bad teams, any advantage is a good enough reason for me.
All right, Adelaide Oval on Sunday Arvo, Freo and the Crows.
This is a real interesting one.
Yeah, Freo should be too good, even though the game is at Adelaide, but obviously you have to factor that in. I think Freo are probably going to win this. Matty Taberner out, as you mentioned, Gus, in the previous episode from the other day, is a big out for them, let's be honest, because he's their only sort of quality key forward. But I just think that their overall team is a lot better, and I think in the end you've got to kind of just go with that sometimes, the quality. So going with Freo.
I agree. I think Freo certainly should win. I'm going to tip Freo. I'm fascinated to see how they go away from home because as we sort of discussed last week in our preview show, a lot of their issues are mental. Playing away from home, we saw probably 5 or 6 games last season where halfway through the first quarter it just felt like they, packed up the lunch and went home for the day because they just thought it was all too hard after having to fly first class across the country. So I am tipping Freo, but this is a big watch for me. I'm really interested to see how they play because they, on talent and on reputation, they should really thrash Adelaide, even if they are in Adelaide. But I'll be really intrigued to see how they come out and play.
I'm actually going to tip Adelaide. Basically,
here we go. That's the way, Lemons.
I think this one could be the upset of the round, and I think the Dockers might underestimate Adelaide, and they'll come out with a bit to prove. And yeah, like you said, Freo not the best at playing away from home, and I think Adelaide might get the jump on them and then pull off a surprising round 1 victory.
I like it. I like it a lot. West Coast versus the Suns, 7:40 on Sunday. This is at Optus. This is a real tough challenge for the Suns, of course, but we also expect West Coast to be very bad. So it is going to be an interesting game. Jack Darling came back, but now he's going to miss the first month of the season with an ankle injury. Oh, God, this is a tough one. I'm going to tip the Suns. Screw it. It's time. It's time for the Suns to start asserting themselves as just even a middle tier team, not a basket case. So they're going to go over to Perth. They're going to knock off the Eagles. Everyone's going to make fun of West Coast. It's going to be great. Everyone's going to love it. So the Suns for me.
Yeah, I agree. I think the Suns will win.
Here we go.
I think West Coast, I think the pessimism might have gotten to them a little bit, and I don't know if they have much belief in themselves at the moment. So I think the Suns will knock them off. And this is going to be a really interesting litmus test because, one of the burning questions about West Coast that I had was whether or not they can just win enough games at home to kind of avoid the bottom 4. But if they're losing to Gold Coast at home straight away, then that would indicate probably not. And that's kind of where I see it as sitting at the moment. So Suns.
I feel like you two are both overthinking this one completely. It's Gold Coast going to Perth, and they're bad, and that's a hard trip. I think West Coast are going to win this and maybe be one of their few victories for the year, but I think they can off to a start and get a win. So I'm going to go with West Coast to get the victory.
Yep, fair enough.
Nice work, Lemons. Good debut.
I tipped 0. I reckon there's a chance.
It's possible. All right. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in to this Wednesday edition of our tipping show coming out just before the Wednesday night games. Tune in next week. We'll be putting out another one. And as I said, Loser does a really bad TikTok dance, which is going out to the world at the end of the season. So stay tuned. We'll also put up the scores every week for people to make sure that we're still where we are. All right. Thanks, everyone. Catch you next week.
Ciao.
Ciao.